Hello, friends. If this joke tickled your funny bone, don't forget to hit subscribe. It's an easy way to keep the humor flowing into your feed. Don't miss the last one. That is special joke for you.
One day, Pete complained to his friend, "My head really hurts. I guess I should see a doctor." His friend said, "Don't do that. There's a computer at the drugstore that can diagnose anything quicker and cheaper than a doctor. Simply tell it the problem, put in a sample of your urine, and the computer will diagnose it and tell you what you can do about the issue you're having. It only costs $20." Pete figured he had nothing to lose. So he filled a jar with a urine sample and went to the drugstore. Finding the computer, he poured in the sample and deposited the $20. The computer started making some noise, and various lights started flashing. After a brief pause, out popped a small slip of paper that read, "You have migraines. You need to take better care of yourself. Get daily rest, drink a lot, and avoid bright lights, stress, and strain. See me again in 2 weeks. Lot during the next 2 weeks." While thinking how amazing this new technology was and how it would change medical science forever, he began to wonder if this could be fooled. He decided to give it a try. He mixed together some tap water, a stool sample from his dog, and urine samples from his wife and daughter. To top it off, he even added some oil from his car. He went back to the drugstore, located the computer, poured in the sample, and deposited the $20, again stating he had a bad headache. He waited curiously to see what the computer would say about the odd mix. The machine again made the usual noises, flashed lights, and printed out the following analysis. Your tap water has too much waste in it. Your dog has ringworms. Your teenage daughter is pregnant. Your wife has had 5 different lovers in the past 6 months. Also, your car needs a new radiator. And you wonder why you have a headache? A fleeing criminal, desperate to escape the police, runs into the desert with hardly any water. Very soon he runs out of drinking water, and hours later he is already plodding under the merciless desert sun. He is close to desperation when suddenly he sees something far off in the distance. Hoping against hope that it is water, he starts running towards what he thinks is an oasis, only to find a little old man with a little stand full of ties. "Hey, you. Do you have water?" pants the criminal. The old man replied, "I've already finished my water, but would you like to buy a tie? They're only $5. The criminal, frustrated, shouted, "You moron! Do I look like I need a tie? I should kill you right here, but I have to find some water first." "There's no call for threats," said the old tie seller indignantly, "but even though you don't want to buy one of my ties, and you treat me like this, I'll help you. If you continue over that hill for about 3 miles, you'll find a restaurant with great food and all the ice-cold water you can drink. Good luck." Muttering in disgust, the criminal staggered away over the hill. Several hours later, the other man sees him crawling on the dune back towards him. When he finally arrives, he lays on his back, panting. "Everything okay?" asked the tie salesman as he bent over to hear the raspy whisper of the other man. "They won't let me in without a tie." A priest, a doctor, and an engineer were waiting one morning for a particularly slow group of golfers. They start getting really upset as time goes on, as they have reserved the time. Engineer: "What's with these guys? We must have been waiting for 25 minutes. Doctor: "I don't know, but I've never seen such ineptitude." Priest: "Hey, here comes the greenkeeper. Let's have a word with him." Priest: "Hi, George. Say, George, what's with that group ahead of us? They're rather slow, aren't they?" George: "Oh, yes, that's a group of blind firefighters. They lost their sight while saving our clubhouse last year. So we let them play here anytime, free of charge." Silence. Priest: "That's so sad. I think I will say a special prayer for them tonight." Doctor: "Good idea. And I'm going to contact my ophthalmologist buddy and see if there's anything he can do for them." Engineer: "Why can't these guys play at night?" A general visits an army hospital to check on the conditions and inspire the troops. It's World War I, trench warfare is living hell, and the men could really use some inspiration. The general starts talking to the wounded soldiers. He goes up to the first man and says, "What brings you in here, son?" The soldier replies, "Sir, I got dysentery in the trenches, something awful." The general asks him, "How are they caring for you in here?" And the soldier replies, "Oh, well, sir, every day the nurses put a cool cloth on my head and they clean my behind with a soft brush." The general asks, "Is there anything else we can do for you?" And the soldier says, "No, sir, the nurses are doing the best they can." The general seems satisfied, thanks him for his service, and moves on to the next man. The general approaches the second man's bed and asks, "What brings you in here, son?" The soldier replies, somewhat embarrassed, "Sir, I got gonorrhea from a woman while I was on leave." The general laughs and says, "It happens to the best of us, so how are they caring for you in here?" And the soldier replies, "Well, sir, every day the nurses put a cool cloth on my head and they clean my privates with a soft brush." The general asks, "Is there anything else we can do for you?" And the soldier says, "No, sir, the nurses are doing the best they can." The general once again seems satisfied, thanks him for his service, and moves on to the next man. The general approaches the third man's bed and asks, "What brings you in here, son?" The soldier tells him, "Sir, I got strep throat in the trenches." The general asks, "How are they caring for you in here?" And the soldier replies, "Well, sir, every day the nurses put a cool cloth on my head and they clean my throat with a soft brush." The general asks, "Is there anything else we can do for you?" And the soldier says, "Actually, sir, there is one thing. I'd like to be the first one to use the brush." A Bible study group was discussing the unforeseen possibility of their sudden death. The leader of the discussion said, "We will all die someday, and none of us really know when, but if we did, we would all do a better job of preparing ourselves for that inevitable event." Did everybody shook their heads in agreement with this comment? Then the leader said to the group, "What would you do if you knew you only had 4 weeks of life remaining before your death and then the great judgment day?" A gentleman said, "I would go out into my community and minister the gospel to those that have not yet accepted the Lord into their lives." "Very good," said the group leader, and all the group members agreed that would be a very good thing to do. One lady spoke up and said enthusiastically, "I would dedicate all of my remaining time to serving God, my family, my church, and my fellow man with a greater conviction." "That's wonderful," the group leader commented, and all the group members agreed that would be a very good thing to do. But one gentleman in the back finally spoke up loudly and said, "I would go to my mother-in-law's house for the 4 weeks." Everyone was puzzled by this answer, and the group leader asked, "Why your mother-in-law's home?" "Because that will make it the longest 4 weeks of my life." You may have heard of the best-kept secret of the U.S. Army, the infamous Area 51 in Nevada, where secret operations are conducted. It was late afternoon when the Air Force spotted a Cessna airplane landing right at Area 51. Perplexed, they immediately seized the pilot and dragged him into an interrogation room. The pilot's story was that he took off from Vegas, got lost, and spotted the base just as he was about to run out of fuel. The Air Force started a full FBI background check on the pilot and held him overnight during the investigation. By the next day, they were finally convinced that the pilot really was lost and wasn't a spy. They gassed up his airplane, gave him a terrifying "you did not see a base" briefing, complete with threats of spending the rest of his life in prison, told him Vegas was that way on such and such a heading, and sent him on his way. The day after that, though, to the total disbelief of the Air Force, the same Cessna showed up again. Once again, the MPs surrounded the plane, only this time there were 2 people in the plane, the pilot and a sour, angry-looking woman, The same pilot jumped out and said, "I know I shouldn't be here again, and you can do anything you want to me, but please, please, will you tell my wife that I actually did spend last night in Area 51? Two rednecks flew to Canada on a hunting trip. They chartered a small plane to take them into the Rockies for a week hunting moose. They managed to bag 6. As they were loading the plane to return, the pilot said the plane could take only 4 moose. The two guys objected strongly. "Last year we shot 6. The pilot let us take them all, and he had the same plane as yours." Reluctantly, the pilot gave in, and all 6 were loaded. The plane took off. However, while attempting to cross some mountains, even on full power, the little plane couldn't handle the load and went down. Somehow surrounded by the moose bodies, only the 2 rednecks survived the crash. After climbing out of the wreckage, Billy Ray asked Billy Bob, "Any idea where we are?" Billy Bob replied, "I think we're pretty close to where we crashed last year." A tourist in Vienna is going through a graveyard, and all of a sudden he hears music. No one is around, so he starts searching for the source. He finally locates the origin and finds it is coming from a grave with a headstone that reads, "Ludwig van Beethoven, 1770 to 1827. Then he realizes that the music is the Ninth Symphony, and it is being played backward. Puzzled, he leaves the graveyard and persuades a friend to return with him. By the time they arrive back at the grave, the music has changed. This time it is the 7th Symphony, but like the previous piece, it is being played backward. Curious, the men agree to consult a music scholar. When they return with the expert, the 5th Symphony is playing again backward. The expert notices that the symphonies are being played in the reverse order in which they were composed. The 9th, then the 7th, then the 5th. By the next day, the word had spread, and a crowd had gathered around the grave. They are all listening to the 3rd Symphony, being played backward. Just then, the graveyard's caretaker ambles up to the group. Someone in the group asks him if he has an explanation for the music. "I would have thought it was obvious," the caretaker says. "He's decomposing." A blind man is unafraid to travel and experience new things around the world. Eventually, his travels take him to Texas. When he gets to his hotel room, he feels the bed. "Wow, this bed is huge." "Everything is bigger in Texas," says the bellhop cheerfully. The man heads downstairs to the bar, settles into a huge bar stool, and orders a beer. A mug is placed between his hands. "Wow, these drinks are enormous," the bartender disclaims. "Everything is big in Texas." After downing a few, the blind man asks where the bathroom is. "Second door to the right," says the bartender. The blind man heads for the bathroom, but accidentally enters the 3rd door, which leads to the swimming pool, and the poor guy falls right in. The few swimmers there were shocked when a man suddenly popped his head up from under the water, flailing his arms and screaming, "Don't flush, don't flush." A 15-year-old Amish boy and his father visited the city for the very first time. They wandered around, marveling at the different sights. Eventually, they got to a mall. They were amazed by almost everything they saw, but they were especially amazed at 2 shiny, silver walls that could move apart and then slide back together again. The boy asked, "What is this, Father?" The father, never having seen an elevator, responded, "Son, I have never seen anything like this in my life. I don't know what it is." While the boy and his father were watching with amazement, a fat old lady in a wheelchair rolled up to the moving walls and pressed a button. The walls opened, and the lady passed between them into a small room. The walls closed, and the boy and his father watched the small numbers above the walls light up sequentially. They continued to watch until it reached the last number, and then the numbers began to light in the reverse order. Finally, the walls opened up again, and a gorgeous 24-year-old blonde woman stepped out. The father, not taking his eyes off the young woman, said quietly to his son, "Junior, go get your mother." A woman hired a contractor to repaint the interior of her house. The woman walked the man through the second floor of her home and told him what color she wanted for each room. As they walked through the first room, the woman said, "I think I would like this room in cream color." The contractor wrote on his clipboard, walked to the window, opened it, and yelled out, "Green side up." He then closed the window and continued following the woman to the next room. The woman looked confused, but proceeded with her tour. "In this room, I was thinking of an off blue." Again, the contractor wrote this down, went to the window, opened it, and yelled out, "Green side up." This baffled the woman, but she was hesitant to say anything. In the next room, the woman said she would like it painted in a light rose color. And once more, the contractor opened the window and yelled, "Green side up." Struck with curiosity, the woman mustered up the nerve to ask, "Why do you keep yelling green side up out of my window each time I tell you what color I'd like a room?" The contractor replied, "Because I have a crew of blondes laying turf across the street." It's been a long, long day, and John the truck driver really wanted to just get home. Living in Washington, D.C., he knew traffic would be bad this time of evening, but to his horror, a traffic jam reared ahead of him, larger than anything he could have anticipated. Bewildered, since he hadn't heard anything yet on the news, he stuck his head out and just kept seeing cars slowing down and then driving off. Nothing was moving. Suddenly, a man knocks on the window. The driver rolls down the window and asks, "What's going on?" "Terrorists have kidnapped the entire U.S., Congress." "Oh, my gosh!" exclaimed John. "And they're asking for a $100 million ransom." "Geez Louise!" moaned John. "Otherwise, they are going to douse them all in gasoline and set them on fire." "Lord have mercy," cried John. "We are going from car to car collecting donations." "How much is everyone giving on average?" asked John. "About a gallon." An older, tired-looking dog wandered into my yard. I could tell from his collar and well-fed belly that he had a home and was well taken care of. He calmly came over to me, and I gave him a few pats on the head. He then followed me into my house, slowly walked down the hall, curled up in the corner, and fell asleep. An hour later, he went to the door, and I let him out. The next day, he was back, greeted me in my yard, walked inside, resumed his spot in the hall, and again slept for about an hour. This continued off and on for several weeks. Curious, I pinned a note to his collar. "I would like to find out who the owner of this wonderful sweet dog is, and ask if you are aware that almost every afternoon your dog comes to my house for a nap." The next day, he arrived for his nap with a different note pinned to his collar. "He lives in a home with 6 children, 2 under the age of 3. He's trying to catch up on his sleep. Can I come with him tomorrow?" A doctor was addressing a large audience in Oxford on the subject of modern nutrition. "The rubbish we put into our stomachs should have killed most of us sitting here years ago. Red meat is full of steroids and dye. Soft drinks corrode your stomach lining. Chinese food is loaded with MSG. High trans fat diets can be disastrous. And none of us realize the long-term harm caused by the germs in our drinking water. But there is one thing that is the most dangerous of all, and most of us have or will eat it. Can anyone here tell me what food it is that causes the most grief and suffering for years after eating it?" After several seconds of quiet, a 70-year-old man in the front row raised his hand and softly said, "Wedding cake?" One day, an old man decided he had enough and went to court to file for a divorce. Standing before the judge, the man looked frustrated. The judge, sensing his distress, asked, "Why do you want to divorce your wife?" The old man sighed heavily and said, "Your Honor, I'm just not happy with her. She doesn't make me feel good, and I'm miserable." The judge, wanting to hear both sides, turned to the wife and asked, "Is this true? Is your husband unhappy because of you?" The wife, unfazed, smiled confidently and replied, "The entire neighborhood is happy with me, Your Honor. It's just this guy who can't seem to handle it." On the outskirts of a small town, there was a big old pecan tree just inside the cemetery fence. One day, two boys filled up a bucket full of nuts and sat down by the tree out of sight and began dividing the nuts. "One for you, one for me, one for you, one for me," said one boy. Several dropped and rolled down toward the fence. Another boy came riding along the road on his bicycle. As he passed, he thought he heard voices from inside the cemetery. He slowed down to investigate. Sure enough, he heard, "One for you, one for me, one for you, one for me." He just knew what it was. He jumped back on his bike and rode off. Just around the bend, he met an old man with a cane hobbling along. "Come here quick," said the boy. "You won't believe what I heard. The devil and the Lord are down at the cemetery dividing up the souls." The man said, "Beat it, kid. Can't you see it's hard for me to walk?" When the boy insisted, though, the man hobbled slowly to the cemetery. Standing by the fence, they heard, "One for you, one for me." One for standing by the fence, they heard, "One for you, one for me. One for you, one for me." The old man whispered, "Boy, you've been telling me the truth. Let's see if we can see the lore." Shaking with fear, they peered through the fence, yet were still unable to see anything. The old man and the boy gripped the wrought iron bars of the fence tighter and tighter as they tried to get a glimpse of the Lord. At last they heard, "One for you, one for me, that's all. Now let's go get those nuts by the fence, and we'll be done." The old man beat the boy to the gate. Beat. One day an out-of-work mime is visiting the zoo and attempts to earn some money as a street performer. However, as soon as he starts to draw a crowd, the zookeeper grabs him and forcefully drags him into his office. The zookeeper then explains to the mime that the zoo's most popular attraction, a gorilla, has died suddenly. The keeper fears that attendance at the zoo will fall off. He offers the mime a job to dress up as the gorilla until they can get another one. The mime accepts. The next morning, before visitors arrive at the zoo, the mime puts on the gorilla suit and enters the cage. He discovers that it's a great job. He can sleep all he wants, play and make fun of people, and he draws bigger crowds than he ever did as a mime. However, eventually the crowds tire of him, and he gets bored just swinging on tires. He begins to notice that the people are paying more attention to the lion in the cage next to his, not about to lose the attention of the adoring crowd. He climbs to the top of his cage, crawls across a partition, and dangles from the top to the lion's cage. Of course, this makes the lion furious, but the crowd loves it. At the end of the day, the zookeeper comes and gives the mime a raise for being such a good attraction as a gorilla. Well, this goes on for some time. The mime keeps taunting the lion, the crowds grow larger, and his salary keeps going up. Then one terrible day when he is dangling over the furious lion, he slips and falls. The mime is terrified. The lion gathers itself and prepares to pounce. The mime is so scared that he begins to run round and round the cage with the lion close behind. Finally, the mime starts screaming and yelling, "Help! Help me!" But the lion is quick and pounces. The mime soon finds himself flat on his back looking up at the angry lion when he suddenly hears the lion whisper, "Shut up, you idiot! You want to get us both fired?" A champion jockey is about to enter an important race on a new horse. The horse's trainer meets him before the race and says, "All you have to remember with this horse is that every time you approach a jump, you have to shout, 'Ollie-o!' really loudly in the horse's ear. Providing you do that, you'll be fine." The jockey thinks the trainer is mad, but promises to shout the command. The race begins, and they approach the first hurdle. The jockey ignores the trainer's ridiculous advice, and the horse crashes straight through the center of the jump. They carry on and approach the second hurdle. The jockey, somewhat embarrassed, whispers, "Ole oop!" in the horse's ear. The same thing happens. The horse crashes straight through the center of the jump. At the third hurdle, the jockey thinks, "It's no good, I'll have to do it," and yells, "Ole oop!" really loudly. Sure enough, the horse sails over the jump with no problems. This continues for the rest of the race, but due to the earlier problems, the horse only finishes third. The trainer is fuming and asks the jockey what went wrong. The jockey replies, "Nothing is wrong with me. It's this bloody horse. What is he, deaf or something?" The trainer replies, "Deaf? Dave! You idiot, he's not deaf, he's blind." A police officer is walking his beat when he catches with his eye a trail of $50 notes leading into an alley. Curious, he immediately goes in and finds an old woman with 2 bags of trash dragging on the ground, one of them leaving $50 notes in its wake. He calls the woman to halt and approaches her. "Excuse me, ma'am, but one of your bags has a hole," he points out. The woman thanks him profoundly, but he, still curious, asks, "Hope you don't mind me snooping around, but where did you get all that money?" "Well, you see, Mr. Officer," the old lady explains, "I have a lovely house at the end of the street, and it just so happens to be right next to a very famous bar. I don't mind the noise, but every night the mister are always some drunkards that, it's all over my garden," she said, her voice shaking with indignation. "So yesterday night I stood there with my pruning shears, and whenever someone got their thingy out, I'd say, 50 bucks or I'll cut it off." Laughing at the amusing idea of those scared drunkards handing their money, the police officer lets her go about her way. But as she turns to go, he jokingly asks, "Is the second bag filled with money, too?" "Well, you know, Mr. Officer, not everyone pays." A DEA police officer stops at a ranch in Texas and talks with an old rancher. From the first second, he had a bad attitude about him, annoyed he had to muddy his clean boots out in the country. He tells the rancher, "I need to inspect your ranch for illegally grown drugs." The rancher says, "All right, you can search the ranch, but do not go in that field over there." The DEA officer, clearly angry, says, "Mister, I have the authority of the federal government with me." Reaching into his rear pants pocket, he removes his badge and proudly displays it to the rancher. "See this badge? Do you? This badge means I am allowed to go wherever I wish on any land, with no questions asked or answers given. Have I made myself clear? Do you understand me?" he shouts. The rancher nods quietly, apologizes, and goes about his chores. A short time later, the old rancher hears loud screams and sees the DEA officer running for his life, chased by the rancher's big Santa Gertrudis bull. With every step, the bull is gaining ground on the officer as he runs for all he's worth. The rancher throws down his tools, runs to the fence, and yells at the top of his lungs, "Your badge! Show him your badge!" 3 women die and go to heaven. When they get there, St. Peter says, "We only have one rule here in heaven: do not step on the ducks." So they enter heaven, and there are ducks all over the place. It is almost impossible not to step on a duck, and although they try their best to avoid them, the first woman accidentally steps on one. Along comes St. Peter with the ugliest man she ever saw. St. Peter chains them together and says, "Your punishment for stepping on a duck is to spend eternity chained to this man." The next day, the second woman accidentally steps on a duck, and along comes St. Peter. With him is another extremely ugly man. He chains them together with the same admonishment as for the first woman. The third woman has observed all this and is very careful where she steps. She manages to go months without stepping on any ducks, but one day St. Peter comes up to her with the most handsome man she has ever laid eyes on. St. Peter chains them together without saying a word. The happy woman says, "I wonder what I did to deserve being chained to you for all of eternity." The guy says, I don't know about you, but I stepped on a duck. An Irishman walked into a bar in Dublin, ordered 3 pints of Guinness, and sat at the back of the room, drinking a sip out of each one in turn. When he finished them, he came back to the bar and ordered 3 more. The bartender approached and told him, "You know, a pint goes flat after I draw it, and it would taste better if you bought one at a time." The Irishman replied, "Well, you see, I have 2 brothers. One is in America, the other is in Australia, and I'm in Dublin. When we all left home, we promised that we'd drink this way to remember the days we drank together. So I drink one for each of my brothers and one for myself." The bartender admitted that this was a fine tradition and left it there. The Irishman became a regular in the bar and always drank the same way. He ordered 3 pints and drank them in turn. One day he came in and ordered 2 pints. All the other regulars took notice and fell silent. When he came back to the bar for the second round, the bartender said, "I don't want to intrude on your grief, but I wanted to offer my condolences on your loss." The Irishman looked quite puzzled for a moment. Then a light dawned, and he laughed. "Oh, no. Everybody's just fine," he explained. "It's just that my wife had us join that Baptist church, and I had to quit drinking. But it hasn't affected my brothers, though."
If you're still here, I'm thrilled you enjoyed the joke. Subscribing is a simple way to stay connected. Join our community and make me a happy friend.